Okay, I think I need to turn the screen around. Is it this tool? Make sure I get the right tools. Okay. Okay, good morning. We are in John chapter 21. So Eve and John, or other Deanne, people who might be joining us from remote, you can hop on. And please feel free to comment. We love to see your questions or comments as we go along. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We are in John chapter 21. So in John, before we do John chapter 21, we kind of need to do a little bit of lead in. And because John 21 is actually kind of like its own little piece. It's not as connected to the rest of the book as you know, because John had a specific purpose in his writing, and he reveals it in John chapter 20 in verse 30. Look at John 20 verse 30. John 20 verse 30 says, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. That's why John wrote, and that's his conclusion. That's the conclusion of his writing, that he wrote these things. There were other things that happened. There's lots of other stuff I could have written down, but I wanted to write these things down so that you can see and understand that Jesus is the Son of God. That was the purpose. And now we have chapter 21. Well, what's the deal with chapter 21? The thing with chapter 21 is that there's an issue that's been left unanswered. There's an issue that's not been taken care of yet. And that's the problem of Peter. What's the deal with Peter? So we know that when the Pentecost came, Peter stood up and gave the sermon that won 3,000 souls for Christ when he spoke. When the Holy Spirit descended on them on Pentecost, and he spoke, and we have the winning of 3,000 souls. We know that he became a leader in the church. But how did he go from the time that he betrayed Jesus when he said he didn't know him and he denied Jesus the 3 times? How do we get from that to all of a sudden he's a leader of the church and he's standing up and preaching and winning all those souls? What I love about this story is I feel like him as us. I feel like there are many times when we're Christians, we believe in God, we do the right thing, except for that one time when we really messed it up, when we should have said something and we just didn't, except for that one time, right? And then we feel like we can't even it's like we feel like we can't even get back into it because we're like, what would you say, like, go ahead.
Is there any place in the scripture that says Paul redeemed himself?
Peter?
Sorry, I meant Peter, Paul.
Well, good question, because we're going to talk about that today. That is today's topic, because that's what John does. If you look at chapter 21, John addresses the issue of Peter. He addresses what happened with Peter. How did Peter go from being the one who denied that he knew Christ to being back to being the leader of the disciples? In John chapter 1, verse 35 to 40, you don't have to look at it right now, but we see that Peter, we meet Peter. John describes Peter in Jericho at Pentecost. And Peter goes with his brother Andrew and with John, and they go and they meet Jesus. And Andrew and John were disciples of John the Baptist, and that was identified in John 1:29. And then we see, and that's when Jesus was identified. So we know Peter was very early on in seeing Jesus and seeing the ministry of Jesus. So after spending the day with Jesus, they went off to meet him. Now you might say, how did these guys know each other? Now I can't keep track of all this, so I have my little paper, and I'm going to write it on here so that maybe it'll help us to keep track of who's who, because we're going to read about these people. So I got my where's my pen? Here it is. Okay, so first of all, let me make sure I'm on the right place here. I'm on the wrong side. I have it flipped so that the screen will show it here. Okay, so first of all, we have Peter. I don't like that one. Let's try this one. Oh, not very dark. We have Peter and Andrew, and they are brothers. Peter and Andrew are brothers. So we hear their names together a lot of times in Scripture, huh? Peter and Andrew. Peter and Andrew were brothers. So Peter and Andrew are brothers. Okay? Now, also brothers were James and John. James and John were brothers, and they were the sons of Zebedee. Clear as mud so far? Okay. So Peter and Andrew are brothers. James and John are brothers. And Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Zebedee all work together in a commercial fishing business. In fact, it's believed that that's why when John was able to get Peter into the courtyard, that the reason was because of their commercial fishing business. They were known by the different people in lead capacities there, and so being the son of Zebedee, he had connections to the leadership that got him into the courtyard. And so that's how John, remember we talked about how he knew the person at the gate, and they let Peter come into the courtyard. So we believe that commercial fishing business was part of that. And you might say, well, how is Zebedee connected to, how are they connected to the Jewish leadership? Well, Zebedee is married to Salome. How do we do that? The wife. I'm going to put a W for wife, is Salome. Okay, so Zebedee and Salome are married. And Salome she's either the sister or the sister-in-law. The sister or the sister-in-law, in that culture language, that would be the same word. It wouldn't be different for that culture. So she's either the sister or sister-in-law of Mary, Jesus' mother. Oh, look at this. Can you see it all connecting now? So Zebedee is married to Salome. Salome is the sister or sister-in-law of Mary, Jesus' mother. And then, so that makes, this connection makes this connection this way.
So those four are Jesus' cousins.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. They're cousins. Let me make sure I get this right. James, John, and Jesus. So let's use a different color. Our cousins.
Kind of stretched out cousins. Yeah.
So, Mary has Jesus. So, they're directly cousins.
Yeah.
So these are cousins, and these are cousins. Wow. There's more. John the Baptist is the son of Zachariah and Elizabeth was related to Jesus' mother. So Elizabeth and Zachariah, something like that, was related to Jesus' mother. So they had John the Baptist. This is Jesus. So guess what that makes these guys? Marvin?
Well,
It's like Welton to me.
Yeah. Yeah, since Zachariah and Elizabeth had John the Baptist,
like the
and
Rivera clan.
Elizabeth is related to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So John the Baptist and Jesus are cousins, and James and John are cousins. So that makes them all cousins, first cousins. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Especially when we go back, I wish I had known this or realized this when we talked about how Jesus was preaching. And wasn't it James and John who invited Peter to come and watch this Jesus guy, invited him to come over, or was it Andrew? They said, come and see this guy preach. But I had never thought about the connection to them with them being cousins of him and being in the same business, because there's like a connection. If that's the person you work with all the time, it's almost like family. So these people were strongly connected, and that's why they call this group of the apostles the inner circle with Jesus. They were the most intimate or closest with Jesus because they had known him for the longest time, being in the family, so to speak. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if that really shows up on the screen, but Peter and Andrew were in business with James, John, and Zebedee. They were in a commercial fishing business. James, John, Jesus, and John the Baptist were cousins. And their relatives, like Zechariah, who was a priest and all that, those relatives, Zebedee being the father of the commercial business, fishing business person, head of the business, and then Zechariah being the head of the priest, that's what gave them the inside information when Jesus was taken to trial, and Peter got let into that courtyard. And that's where that denial happens. Okay? So I just want to lay the groundwork for what we're going to see happen now in John chapter 21. So in the Synoptic Gospels, after Peter's confession of faith at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus assigns Peter a position of leadership among the 12. So I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 16, if you would. In Matthew 16, we're going to see the position that Jesus gave Peter. Matthew 16, starting at verse 17. Matthew 16, starting at verse 17. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man." Now, just so you know, some people take this to be like a general term. This term "you" is you personally, you individually, you, Peter. This is speaking directly to Peter. So sometimes you'll hear in a sermon, people will say, this is Jesus speaking to us all, that we should, well, maybe, maybe not. But in this, what the language here is saying you, personal singular, you, Peter. Okay? So Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you the truth, that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." You personally, you yourself, Peter. He's saying that to him. Now, notice he starts by using the name Simon. Peter was the nickname that Jesus gave him. And some people think that Jesus, in fact, a lot of scholars believe that Jesus had a real sense of humor because he gave people names that kind of were a little bit sarcastic. So maybe you know someone who's really shy, and you call them the sons of thunder, right? Like you give the opposite name, the nickname, a nickname that's different than the actual characteristics of that person. Was Peter considered a rock? No. He was wishy-washy. He was all over the place. He's the one who got up to strike the guard's ear off, right? He's the one he was like a flash in the pan. He was not the rock. Hence, Jesus gave him the name, the rock, Peter. "And on this rock I will build my church," he tells him right here. So it's kind of like it's almost like an aspirational nickname. Mm-hmm. And Jesus did that a lot. He was very close to them. And you can see how if you had a cousin that you were working with, you might use that kind of a term with them. It's kind of an affectionate, because it's aspirational. It's not a negative thing, but it's kind of funny also because it's not really the characteristics of that person. So we see that here. So in Matthew 16, we see that Jesus designates him as a leader. He speaks up. Peter speaks up at the Transfiguration. He's the one who speaks up at the Transfiguration. When the religious leaders asked about paying taxes, it was Peter that spoke up. When he sits at the right hand of Jesus at the Last Supper, those are all leadership roles that Peter had. So he was kind of the leader of the disciples at that time. So when it came to the time that he denied Christ, he did not have a lack of faith. He had a lack of courage.
And not only he denied him a few hours after professing that he would never do that.
Never. After he tried to cut the ear off. He's in the courtyard, and they believe the courtyard was like 27 by 27 feet. That would have been the size they think that it was. So it wasn't like it was a long distance. How far is 27 feet, Marvin? Would it be from here to the wall?
Maybe a little more, but
A little
about
more.
that, pretty close.
Not as big as this room, right?
No, maybe to that wall.
Maybe to that wall. Okay, from like here to that wall, 27 feet. So that's the space. When Jesus passed through the courtyard, all bloodied up, and was heading out, and the cock crowed, and it says that their eyes met. They were like in this amount of space. It was not a great big distant thing. And so when their eyes met, and Peter denied them 3 times, you can just imagine the dagger to Peter's heart. What have I done? What have I done? And there's my Savior, my Christ, going. Can you just imagine? Now, he still had faith because he didn't give up. He still stayed with the disciples, right? It wasn't a faith issue for him. It was a courage issue. Now, do we have that? All the time. Isn't it? I feel like we always have this problem with not knowing if we should speak or not speak and not feeling bold enough, and then later regretting that we didn't speak up, because we should have said something, or not really knowing what to say. And I feel like a lot of times we're like Peter. I don't think I hate to even say it because then it'll probably happen to me, but I can't really remember ever denying Christ. I don't think I've ever gone that far, but I have not spoken when I thought I should have spoken. I have done that. And I think Peter, he was such a flash, that I think that he went even further than what maybe many of us would do. We might not actually deny Christ, but we might keep our mouth shut when we should have spoken up. I had an opportunity. I was visiting this last weekend, and someone was telling me how frustrated they were with the people in their area who claimed to be Christians. They attend various churches, and their lifestyle is not proper. It's not appropriate at all. It's completely terrible. And the person said to me, yeah, and they're Christians. And I turned to that person, made eye contact, we were close, and I said, no, those aren't Christians. And the person I was talking to knew what I meant, because they know what real Christians are. And those people are people who are claiming to be Christians and living any old way they want to, and then going to church and doing whatever they do at church, maybe go to church, maybe not, but claiming to be Christians, and then they behave that way. That is not being a Christian. Now, whether they're saved or not or whatever, I'm not getting in that, but I can tell you, that is not Christian behavior. They will know us by our behavior. The world will know we are Christians by our love, by the forgiveness, by what we offer from Christ, not by our lifestyle that thinks that we be forgiven for anything. We do anything we want and just ask forgiveness for it later and we're fine.
When we're baptized, it doesn't give us I can do anything.
Right. So, this, I think, is a very important piece. After Peter's denial, in all 4 Gospels, we never hear him speak again. He was present. We have record that he was present at least 2 of Jesus' appearances in the locked upper room, but he says nothing. John tells us that Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene at the tomb Both Luke and Paul tell us that Jesus appeared first to Peter. Luke 24:34 and 1 Corinthians 15:3 talk about Christ appearing to Peter first. Sure. Luke 24:34 and 1 Corinthians 15:3. So Jesus appeared to Peter. So what do you think he said? We don't have any record of what he said to Peter. Peter's not spoken or done any activity that we know of until now, until this time. We're going to read about it in chapter 21. But he has seen Jesus. Jesus came to him. What do you think Jesus said to him?
Maybe I forgive you, I don't know.
I would imagine there was some conversation around that denial. But obviously, Peter still feels ashamed. Is that not what we are? We do something like that, and then it's hard for us to ever come back from having done whatever it is we did, because we feel ashamed about it. Even if we know, if Jesus had a conversation with him privately, just him and Peter, you know there had to be something about, I'm sorry, Lord, I don't know why I did that, right? It probably was something like where Jesus probably said, look, I was afraid too. You saw me bleeding from praying. I was so tense about it. It was a tense moment. You just lacked courage. Your faith is strong. You just lacked courage. I forgive you. Let's go on from here. You can, can't you just imagine a little pep talk? But he's still feeling torn about his own behavior. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing.
A mix, right? Yeah, good. Good, because if we remember the way we behaved in the past, it'll help us to change and not do that again that we feel bad about doing.
We'll stick our foot in it every once in a while.
Yes.
But God's there to help us out of it.
But have you not met people who give up?
Yes, yes.
They make one mistake, and you may not ever say anything about it to them. They may not say anything about it to you, but they just kind of give up because it's like they just can't get past it. Yeah. Yeah. So in John 21 now, we have the epilogue. Now, John is going to address this problem with Peter. So let's take a look at John 21. Starting at verse 1. It's good to see everybody joining us online. Connie and Corey, good to see you guys. David? Yep, lots of people on this morning. Okay, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. Okay, who are those people? Are those all the fishermen? No, they're not all the fishermen. There's a few of them there that are part of this fisherman group, right? But they're not all fishermen. Just keep that in your head. These are not all fishermen. In fact, 2 of them, we're not even sure which of the disciples they were. It just says 2 others. Verse 3. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now the question is, were they really trying to catch anything? They're really torn up about Jesus. And what do they do now? What do we do now? What is our activity now? They're still kind of grieving this whole thing. They've seen him a couple times in the upper room, but they're still just kind of disturbed by it all, right? Kind of shooken up. Some scholars say they didn't even try to fish. Some scholars think they were probably just kind of like, throw the net over, we'll see what it's like, let's just go out and get out on the water where it's calm and peaceful. The morning time, we'll just go out, let's do something normal. Just do something normal, like get out there and fish and just be casual about it. Some scholars believe that. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Now that word friends, that wasn't like, hey guys, got any fish? That was like friends, like it was a closeness. So they knew it was someone that knew them, right? It would be someone close to you that would say that. No, they answered, because they couldn't see who it was, right? They're going, no, I haven't caught anything. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, who's that? John.
The author.
John said to Peter, "It's the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire burning, coals there with fish on it, and some bread. Okay, so if you take if you take the Tiberias, city of Tiberias, where they shoved off at, and they were near Tubga there, and you go out 100 yards, the water is only several feet deep. In other words, you can walk. You can walk. Now you've got a boat to haul your fish in, because you're not going to drag your fish along behind the boat, right? So you've got a boat that you're fishing in, but the water is shallow. It's shallow enough to walk in. So 100 yards from the shore, it's walkable. That's why Peter wrapped his cloak around him, hopped in the water, and he starts walking in. Now, how easy is it to walk in the water compared to a boat?
As long as your clothes don't get wet, it's pretty easy.
Well, I've been out at the river, and I'm trying to walk in the water, and I'm slugging along, I'm working hard to walk in the water, and the boat just goes,
Got a motor on it.
That's
huh?
been my experience. Or the inner tube, somebody on a tube. Just the fact that you're floating on the water, it's actually faster. But Peter, being the steady sort of rock, right? Being the kind of flash in the pan guy, he wraps his cloak around him and hops in the water and starts walking his way. Take a look at the next verse. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many of the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now, have you heard people say, go ahead.
How come every time Jesus feeds the group, they're all eating raw fish? Like right now, he took
He's
the
got a
bread.
fire.
It's got a fire going.
He said he's got a fire with fish on the fire.
Charcoal.
Yeah, but he said, let's see.
It says,
Bring some of those fish you've got. Bring them over. We'll put them on the blaze. Yeah.
they saw the charcoal fire there.
It's like they're having a barbecue. He's got some fish and bread already on it. And he says, bring a few of those fish over. We'll cook a few. Right? Okay, but you know what some people make a big deal out about? Is 153 fish.
Yeah.
Have you heard all kinds of stories about that? Why 153? Right? Well, there was one for a long time. There was a guy, his name was Saint Augustine. You know what Saint Augustine said? He said that if you take an equilateral triangle with 17 dots equally spaced to make the shape of the equilateral triangle, and then fill the inside of the triangle equally spaced with the same number of dots, you get 153.
Okay.
So he was saying that's a measure of completeness, complete. The Trinity, an equilateral triangle, and that's a Trinity. That seems a little out there, but it's a kind of an interesting thing. Okay, here's another one. It's actually, I have the name of the people. Jerome, Saint Jerome, says that there was a Greek zoologist that cataloged 153 species of fish. And so since the disciples caught 153, it's like saying they need to go out and reach the whole world. All the world. Have you heard that one?
No.
Yeah, we're not really sure, though, that any of these guys ever read the Greek zoologist account of 153 fish. And I don't know if that seems a little stretched out, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What we do know is it was a lot of fish, and they probably counted them because there were so many.
Mm-hmm.
We caught 153 fish. So it was a huge catch. That's probably the more likely thing. And there's more. There's another one that says that in Ezekiel 47:10, the people who use the idea that it's 153 species of fish, and so that means that the gospel needs to go out to the whole world and collect all people. That one, they use Ezekiel 47:10 because in there, Ezekiel, in his description of the Messianic kingdom, including all peoples, it does use this idea that they're fish, that all types of fish will be gathered up, and so it does that's kind of where they base that off of, that in Ezekiel he talks about the Messianic kingdom having all fish. So I don't know. And Jesus did say, I'll make you fishers of men. Take it how you want. The scripture that we see here seems to emphasize that it was a lot of fish, and that seems to be the point. A lot of large fish.
That's
So-
large.
Yes. And John and Jesus appeared to the disciples in the book of John. Jesus appeared to the disciples locked in the upper room, and then secondly in the same upper room with Thomas. And it's believed that the disciples left that room and headed toward Galilee on the last day of the eighth day of the Passover festival. So 6 of the remaining 11 disciples are at the Sea of Galilee with Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana, James, John, and 2 unnamed disciples. Nathanael is not a fisherman. When Peter says, I'm going to go fish, they all just went ahead. And so anyway, that's what that's about. Okay, let's take a look now at what Peter stays in the boat. Now, why did Peter jump out of the boat and start running to shore? He gets to the shore a little after the same time that the boat gets there, right? Why didn't he get there first?
Since
And
the
why
boat
is he
followed him.
and why is he at the boat? Has he said anything? Why would you get out, run to shore because you see Jesus is there? He said Jesus is there, and he runs to shore, and then does he go talk to Jesus? This is showing us his trepidation, his doubt. He's eager to see Jesus, but when he gets there to go see Jesus, he kind of holds back. You would think the one jumping out of the boat to go see Jesus would have run right up to Jesus, right?
Maybe he felt he still wasn't worthy.
I know. He's having these mixed emotions, which I can understand. I feel like I can get how he's feeling. Let's take a look at what happens here in verse 15. So then he gets distracted by the fish. Oh yeah, let's count wow, 153 fish, right? Verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Now, he used the name Simon. I'm sorry, we're in John 21, we're in verse 15. He says, Simon, son of John. That's his formal name. That's not Peter. Peter's the name Jesus gave him, like a nickname. This is his formal name, Simon, son of John. So it's almost like Jesus is calling him out. Simon, son of John. That's like when my mom says, Laura LeRae, right? It's like that. Come on. Son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, Jesus uses the word agape. Okay? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I phileo you. Phileo, brotherly love. Phileo is the love, brotherly love. It's love we use the same word love to mean a brotherly love or companion love, but it's not the agape love.
Yeah, Phileo is, the Philadelphia name comes from the same root.
Yeah, brotherly love. Like you have a brother one to another. Agape is a much closer, deeper love. So Jesus says, do you agape me? He uses his formal name. So, Laura LeRae, do you truly love me? Oh, you know that I love you like a brother. That's the way that interaction is happening. Next time, Jesus said, feed my lambs. Now, did he say, well, phileo's not good enough?
No.
He gave him a task to do. He asked him if he really loved him. Agape loved him. He replied, I phileo you. And Jesus says, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly agape me? He's looking for that same thing again. He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. Now, what's the difference between feed my lambs and take care of my sheep? The lambs are the little ones, the new to the faith, the little ones that are just coming to know me. Take care of my little ones. Who are my sheep? My ones that have been with me, my ones that need to be led to good pasture and protected from evil, that kind of thing. Then the next one, Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time, he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you agape me? How many times did Peter deny Jesus?
3 times.
And how many times did Jesus give Peter the chance?
3.
He did. And every time, look what Peter says. Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you agape me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I phileo you. Peter did not feel that his love was worthy for Jesus. He didn't feel that he had the deep enough love. Why? Because he made a mistake. Because he denied Christ. When he knows he has the faith, he doesn't have the courage. Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Before we go past this, so he's given him 3 chances. Peter's still feeling insecure. And he's still saying, I phileo you, because he knows he denied Jesus before. But every time, Jesus gives him the task to do. Does Jesus allow his lack of courage, his feelings of insecurity, to get in the way of what Jesus tells him to do? He says, start from there. It's like he's saying, okay, go from there. So you phileo me? Okay, act on that. Act on that. Maybe you don't know if you're strong enough. Maybe you don't feel capable. Maybe you feel like you're overwhelmed by this whole idea of living a Christian life. That's okay. Start with what you do know. Now, all of us have seen needs that we couldn't meet. And what do we say? Oh, I can't do anything about that. This terrible thing is happening. Oh, especially the news these days. They have such dramatic stuff on the news that's going on. I'm thinking, I can't do anything about that. Well, that's correct. I can pray about it. But what can I do? Instead of being like Peter and being completely disabled by our lack of courage in the past, we need to look at what we've been given to do and do that. That's what Peter was supposed to be doing, feeding my lambs, feed my sheep. He's supposed to be doing that now, even with his phileo, even though he may not feel strong or feel like he knows exactly what he's doing. So if Bob knows, if he says, you know what, this world needs to know more about Christ, somebody ought to take care of that. I think Dr. Knoll ought to take care of that, right? Make sure everybody knows about Christ. Then what Bob is doing is he's not feeding my lambs. He's not feeding my sheep. Because there's something Bob can do. There's something that God is asking Bob to do. I don't know what it is. Only he knows what it is. And so the question is, Marvin, do you have the courage to do what God has asked for you to do? Or Levon, do you have the courage to do the thing you can do? Instead of saying, well, I can't do it because I'm just, Tom, we need to quit saying that and feeling so disabled by our previous lack of courage or lack of faith or whatever you want to call it. And we need to say, I do love God. What is there that I can do? What is it I can do to serve and bring glory to him? Who can I talk to? What can I do to bring salvation to people?
When it comes down to the Lord, if he asks you to do something and you feel you do not have who's equipped to do it, God will equip you. He never asks you to step forward if he doesn't have the tools to be able to do it.
He doesn't. But when we feel little, when we feel unimportant or weak or like we're not good enough, sometimes we need to get past that even and just say, what is it I know I can do?
We can do God's help.
I can do this. What can I do? Let's do this and get started. And that's what Jesus was saying to Peter. You're supposed to be feeding my sheep. Let's go. You're supposed to be guiding. And does Peter step up to that? We see him at the day of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit comes on him. He preaches and 3,000 souls are saved that day. Peter becomes a leader in the Christian church. We saw that when Paul was ministering, he described the role of Peter and the others in guiding the church. So we do see that Peter does get past it. He does get past this time of insecurity. And to the point that he dies on a cross, but he requests to be crucified upside down so that he does not die in the same way as Christ. He wanted to be different than Christ. So he asked to be upside down on the cross so that he would not die the same as Christ. So Peter's going to die much like Christ died. And he's going to experience that. Of course, he doesn't know that. Let's go on. Verse 20. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved, who's that?
John.
Was following them closely. Ha ha! That's how John knows this story, right? Because John is the one who tells the story. Because John was there. He was the one who heard it with his own ears. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And what is that to you? You must follow me. In other words, Jesus is saying that Peter will die much like Christ died, and that John may not. Now, why is John making this note? Because he's still alive. And nobody can figure out how come John is still alive. He's the last living apostle. He's the oldest guy. He's probably in his 75 to 80 years old. I mean, he's the oldest apostle, living apostle. He's still writing. So John is saying, he's remembering this and saying, you guys who think I should have been dead already, well, I remember when Jesus said this, so there. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. People were thinking that John was going to live forever because he had gotten so old. He had survived we're not really sure if it's true, but there are some historians who say that they attempted to boil John in oil and he didn't die. So if you can't kill him and he continues to live to be 75, 80 years old, the rumor was, he's going to live forever. John will never die, right? So John says, because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And remember, the disciples really believed that Jesus was going to return right away. They saw him go up in the clouds, and they thought he was going to be coming back that same way. They were surprised, too, at how long it was taking for things to happen. Make sure I got this. And then this is the scene.
Well, that's also addressing a basic item of human nature where we try to look at other people and think we're not treated fairly because this guy's all blessed, more than me or whatever.
Right.
Or given more responsibility or more honor or recognition. And Jesus tells Peter, whatever happens to him, that doesn't affect you.
Right.
You know?
Right.
You do your job.
You do your thing.
Yeah.
This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. That would have been a real problem, wouldn't it? You spent 3 years with Jesus. Which things do you write down? we believe that we have that long sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, or the long sermon, where that it's believed that is like one of the main content, and that Jesus would do shortened versions of that everywhere that he spoke. That was the continual message, the repetitive message, and that's why they wrote it down, was because that was what Jesus kept saying in these different settings. But he might say a shortened version in this setting, a little different piece of it in that setting, depending on who he was talking to. But they kind of put in the basic message, because what would you do if a guy spent 3 years going around teaching, and then you had the job of writing down what he taught? You're not going around writing down every word that he says. And so John is saying, look, we're giving you the pieces that we think are important for you to know, that we've been teaching, and we're getting this record straight. And John, being the last living apostle, he wants to get it written down. They have been going around the different people and preaching the content and sharing the content of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Mm-hmm. John's the last living one. He's saying he's been teaching, but now he's thinking, I need to write down the parts that I know. So where does John start the book? What does he say in the very beginning of John?
In the beginning was the Word.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God.
Word with God, and the Word was God. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He starts with creation.
Well, he starts with that Jesus is God.
Yes.
And that's what his whole point was. In the pieces that he told of the story, he brought out the pieces that proved that Jesus was God. That was his point of the story. And so at the end of John 20, that's where it ends, proving that Jesus is God. Chapter 21 proves that Jesus is God of even Peter, even Nicole. Jesus is God of even Marta. He's God of all of us, right? Of each of us, whoever we are. No matter how good or how bad, he's our God. And we respond and do what he asks for us to do from where we are. If God says to you, do you agape me? And you say, well, I know I phileo you, then start there. That's where you start from. Act in faith. Mm-hmm. Okay, so any other comments before I turn off? Okay, next week we start in 1 John.